Hello, this is Josh Levine at Palo Alto Networks, and I'm here to give you a demonstration of a Mission Enclave commissioning use case that I developed in support of the Army's RHN and Gateway Automation project. This demonstration will leverage a sample mission request that has been approved and will be ingested into the XOR platform and have certain automation steps taken that I will show throughout this demonstration. To begin with, I'm going to show you the sample mission request that I developed. This is just basic information, and this is going to be the source that triggers the incident within XOR to perform the specific automated tasks. As you can see, we've got different elements defined here, including the mission ID, supported unit duration, some subnet and gateway information, and points of contact. I've also included a sample SAA, Satellite Access Authorization, and Army Service Authorization that will also be attached to the incident within XOR. So looking inside the XOR platform, you can see I've got one incident ready to be processed. This was configured through a mail listener integration that pulls a specific mailbox every minute for new emails matching a certain subject criteria. Now, this can be tuned to monitor for a specific folder. You don't have to use a mail listener as the trigger for this event. I just chose it for ease of use. You can also do things like pulling a file from an SMB share. So say somebody saves a file that contains all the mission information. XOR can reach out to that share on a periodic basis and pull the information the same way it did from the email box. It can also do it from things like a SharePoint list or an Excel file. There's a variety of different ingest methods, but just for this demonstration, I am using the mail listener. So navigating into the incident, I'm going to go ahead and assign the workflow that I have to provision this mission enclave request. As you can see at the start here, there's a bunch of information that's already been extracted from the email that I provided. That includes all the mission information, the ID, unit supported, date, time groups, as well as the contact and subnet information. One thing to point out here is the mission file section. You can see that the PDF files are available inside the incident within XOR. Those have all been ingested from the email. And as I work through the workflow, you will also see that a rasterization of those files will be available in the platform as well. So the operator doesn't have to navigate back to the email or open a file off a share. They can do it all in this one or in this single interface, eliminating that need for swivel chair or multi-window operations. So if I go over to the work plan, I'm going to go ahead and assign the NCFT demo that I developed. This is the playbook that's going to take action based on an operator's input. So right now what the playbook's doing is it's gone through and it's found that the email had attachments to it, and it's going to provide a rasterization of those, which the operator will be able to click on within the XOR interface. So now that we're at a pausing point, I'll navigate back over to the incident information, and I can scroll down, and you can see I can click right on this sample SAA and view the basic information about it. So again, eliminating the need to hop between tools and providing that single pane of glass. Another thing to note as we go through this, all of the actions that you're going to see taken in this workflow are captured in the war room. So any automated task, any answers to questions that we prompt the operators for, that's all captured here, as well as in the context data section of XOR. Now this is basically a big JSON dictionary that has all the associated incident and case information for a specific event that's been pulled into the platform. And these can all be referenced in different subtasks of the playbook, so you can get very granular with the level of control when it comes to automating actions at the gateway or at the RHN. And again, with XOR, things can be as automated or as manual as you want to make them. A lot of times you'll hear automation mentioned, and people tend to shy away because they don't want to automate everything. As I'm going to show you, we can pick and choose which items that we want to automate. So if I hop back over to my work plan, what I've got now, I'm at a stopping point where it is prompting the user for information. In this case, it's going to ask a series of questions about which actions to take. And as you can see down below, let me zoom out here, I've got 4 different tasks. I've got updating a firewall rule, so this will reach out to a Palo Alto firewall and perform an update of an existing security policy. It'll also create an address object within the firewall and assign that to the security policy. I've got a command to update a router ACL. So this uses the NetMiko integration to SSH into the router and perform the specific commands that are required. I've also got an option to create a ServiceNow ticket and attach the relevant incident information into that ticket. And then lastly, I've got an option here to provision a VM for testing. So this would allow you to spin up a virtual machine that could be placed in the associated subnet for the mission enclave and perform various testing, connectivity tests, and whatever the operators desire to do. If you integrate this with Ansible, which we do have an integration for, and I'll show that at the end of the demonstration, you can run various workflows through that product as well, all called from XOR. So looking back at the data task that it's paused at, you can see this is being presented within XOR. Now, this is just one method of presenting the information to the operator for a decision. You can also have it sent out through different mechanisms like sending an MS Teams message to a channel or a specific operator, sending a message over Slack, sending a message via email where our operator can click on a link that will take them back to the XOR server and give them a similar layout of questions that they can pick and choose from. Now, these questions are all customizable. As you can see, I put in some information where it's pulling out the subnet that's going to be added to the ACL. In this case, I pulled out the specified NIPR subnet. And it also lists the specific commands that are going to be executed. And then likewise here, we see that you've got the ServiceNow tracking ticket option and the updating firewall rule. In this case, it lists the specific firewall rule that's going to be updated. And again, you can pick and choose which tasks you want to automate. So again, a lot of control when it comes to determining which actions you want to take. Now, before I continue, I just want to give you a walkthrough of the other platforms that I have in play with this demonstration. To start with, I've got an instance of vCenter running, and as you can see, I've got a template VM that's been defined for that connectivity test machine that we want to deploy into the mission enclave that can then be used for connectivity testing and whatever other tests might need to be run by the operator. This will be cloned by the XOR playbook. I've got a Palo firewall deployed that has a single rule in there, permit access to Doden. As you can see right now, it's just any, but XOR will be modifying that through the creation of an address object that will then be applied to the policy. So again, no action needed on the part of the analyst with the exception of performing the commit. Now that can also be automated, and you can provide that question to the analyst or to the operator to do. It's just a matter of what level of comfort you have and if any other changes have been made by an operator on the firewall at that time that might warrant holding off on that commit operation. And then next, I've got ServiceNow. This, you will see XOR create a ticket in here. It's important to note as we go through this demo, I'm referencing specific products, but these are interchangeable. You don't have to use ServiceNow. You don't have to use the Palo firewall. You don't have to use vCenter. If you have other platforms, we can tie into them as long as we've got the integration. And if not, you could always submit a request to our content team to have one developed. And then we have partnerships with different OEMs out there, so we might be able to develop it in-house or ask them to develop it to be added to our platform. And then lastly, I've got my integration into a router right now that I'm going to go ahead and reactivate. And as you can see, I've got a basic ACL defined. It's currently 3 lines, and this is the ACL that that XOR is going to modify. So with that said, I'm going to hop back over into XOR, and I'm just going to choose yes for all these answers and let XOR do its thing. So once I click submit, it records those answers, and as you can see, it's bouncing around doing all the different tasks. Now most of these run pretty quickly. For the purposes of this demo, the one that's going to take the longest is the provisioning of VM because it's actually got to clone it. I don't have it starting up the VM, but that is an option as well. And then likewise, you can add subordinate tasks there if you want to actually log into the VM. In this case, it's a Linux machine, so you could SSH into it and then take another set of actions. The NetMiko integration that I use for SSH is very flexible. It has predefined templates to be used for different types of SSH connections, whether it's PAN-OS, Cisco, Linux CLI, Telnet if that's still in use anywhere, and so on. So if I hop back over to vCenter, we can see that the VM is provisioning. Again, it's cloning that demo Linux system that I developed, and it's actually creating it with the mission identifier. So this leads to the standardization portion of XOR. Not only are you able to take these actions in an automated manner, you're able to get some predictability and standardization when it comes to how actions are taken, how objects are created, and how results are reported. So say in the firewall, for example, you can have a consistent naming scheme for your address objects. You can apply certain tags to those objects. In vCenter, you can have the machines named in a consistent manner. And then likewise, they can be decommissioned and removed from these platforms after the mission is concluded. That could be further expanded upon in the playbook to parse out that date-time group and then send an email to an operator asking them if they want to decommission the mission after the mission is complete. So looking at this, you can see the VM is now completely cloned. If I hop back over to the playbook, again, we can see it's already sent the email out to the operator. So looking back at Gmail, I've got the provisioning results. So I'm going to pop this out. And as you can see, it says the mission has been successfully provisioned, and it pulls all this information from the context data that I showed earlier in the demonstration. So all those yes answers I gave, that's captured in context data. The commands and the output that have been run for these commands are all stored in that context data. I added a note here that for the router ACL, a copy run start is required before or to save the configuration. Again, that can be automated. It just depends on your level of comfort and what processes you want to have like true person integrity on. Same thing with the firewall rule. A commit is still required before the rules take effect, unless that's being added to something like an external dynamic list, in which case that IP address could get added, and then the firewall would ingest it on its next poll of that EDL. And then lastly, I've included links to the incident within XOR, so an analyst can just click this link and be taken directly to that incident, as well as the ServiceNow ticket that's been provided. And as you can see, we took some of the information that was provided in the original email and used that as different variables for this email template. So they have contact information as an example. And hopping over to ServiceNow, if I refresh this, we can see we've got the incident that's been created automatically by XOR. Navigating into the incident, you can see that the ASA and the SAA have both been attached. And using these integrations, you can also, right from XOR, add comments to this ticket, close the ticket, tag other individuals in it in a comment note, and so on. So again, this ties back into, you don't have to use ServiceNow. We have integrations with a number of different ITSM platforms. We can also use SharePoint if that's something you use for a source of truth, like a journal. And the possibilities are really limitless in terms of if it has an API, we can interact with it. So if I hop back over to the firewall now, I can give this page a refresh and I can see an address object has been created. And again, this helps with name standardization. So in this case, subnet, the unit name, and what enclave. And you can see the subnet that's been associated with it, the 139.55 address. And if we go back over to our security policies, you can see that subnet has been added to the security policy rule. So now all that's required is a commit. And lastly, if I hop back over to my router, I can do that show IP access list command again. And as you can see, that line has been added to the ACL. And all that's required now is a copy, run, start, or write mem. And now, hopping back over to the playbook, let's take a look at some of the data that's returned from these tasks now that the playbook has completed. Let's start with the update ACL. If I pull that task up, you can see that each of the commands that I executed is stored, as well as the output returned by each of those commands. That is also available here in the context data. So if I expand the NetMiko section, here's all the information that is returned. So this can be used to be parsed out. So if you wanted to make a decision later in the playbook, you can do that. Likewise, if I pull up the ServiceNow ticket creation, you can take a look at the outputs, and you can see you get a ticket ID, so you have a way to reference this when you're ready to update it. This is a selectable field when you're configuring the playbook. So if I were to connect a task below the Create ServiceNow ticket task, I could then look at the outputs returned by the creation task and use that to perform other actions like updating the ticket, adding attachments, and things like that. And same thing goes for the provisioning of VM. If we take a look at the outputs here, you get the UUID of the newly created VM. So you can reference that if you want to take action like powering it off, making a clone, taking a snapshot, and so on. One thing I also didn't mention when we looked through the playbook is the automatic backup of the router and firewall configs that is performed. So prior to these commands executing, I retrieve the existing firewall configuration and the existing router configuration, and then I save them to a private GitHub repository. So I can specify a consistent naming scheme, so if you wanted to be able to version control these and assign them by date or tie them to a date-time group, you can do that. And looking at the GitHub repository, you can see that the files have been created for today's date and time. So if I pull up the firewall config, here's an XML version of the firewall configuration. And then likewise with the router, here's a copy of the current router configuration. So again, some functionality when it comes to version control. So with the playbook covered, I want to hop back over to Xtor because I want to cover a few things and just show you the integrations that I used for this demonstration. In this case, I've got the mail listener, which was used to trigger the event that would provision a mission in the RHN gateway. Again, this can be tied back to any sort of trigger. So if you get a file that's added to a file share or an update to a SharePoint list, those are all viable options. There's a number more than that, but just a couple of the more common ones. Likewise, I use the NetMiko pack for SSH. So this is tying into the routers, but it can also be used depending on the mode of operation for some of the satellite modems to push configurations to them, and any other system that relies on SSH for configuration. In addition to those two, I also use the VMware integration. This ties into a vCenter instance to perform a variety of different tasks in terms of creating VMs, deleting VMs, powering on, powering off, and so on. ServiceNow for ticket creation. And again, these are all interchangeable, so if ServiceNow is not what you use, if we have the integration for it, you can substitute the tasks that I use for creating tickets with the ServiceNow tasks in the playbook. And of course, with the last but not least, the PAN-OS integration for performing commands on the firewall. So this is a very flexible integration in that not only do you have the commands that are built in, you can use the generic PAN-OS command to run XML formatted commands on the firewall that might not be implemented as a dedicated command, such as performing a commit. Now these commands syntax can be identified through the CLI. When you turn on debugging, that'll actually output the required XML syntax that can then be used with this command. Moving over to the marketplace, again, you can browse each of the integrations that are available. So for example, if I go into the VMware integration and click on content, I can click on this link here and we can get a list of all the available commands. If I look here, I see all the different Ansible integrations that we have. Same thing for some of the CI/CD tools. This was just a basic search for CI/CD, but if you know of a specific tool, you can do a search here and see the functionality that's available. We also have a GitLab integration that you can use for either a hosted or an on-prem instance of the software. So you can perform the various commands that we have available for GitLab. And one of the last tools that I wanted to mention is the generic SQL integration. Now, while it doesn't have a lot of applicability to the specific use case I showed you, I have personal experience working with the GEMX product, and I was able to use SQL reporting services to pull statuses from the database generated by GEMX to display the status of encryptors across my deployed environment. So I was able to pull key expiration dates and display that on a dashboard so that you didn't have to log into the KG or the whatever encryptor to check the expiration date. And then this could then be tied in theoretically to an email alert, so when something is about to expire or is within a certain number of days of expiring, you could send an alert to the operators so they can take action. Now, I'm not 100% certain of the backend that Chimera uses, but if it has something similar, you could probably use the generic SQL integration to run queries against the backend database. And with that, I hope you see the value that XOR provides. Again, these playbooks, once developed, provide a good form of training for new personnel on site, as they have the workflows that are available and they can see how they're performed in the RHN. So all they have to do is just follow the steps. It also provides scalability, because now you can develop these playbooks and you can actually expand upon them and further enhance their functionality as you become more comfortable with the tool, and you get predictable results. The outputs are always the same, the file naming is always the same, the object naming is always the same. So again, trainability, scalability, and predictability. 3 key requirements when it comes to implementing any technology, in my opinion. And with that, I will open the floor to any questions. I appreciate your time.